Hi, my name is Eric Ciampoli. I'm your host at Manufacturing Roundtable. And today we are joined by Amit Jain, who is a leader in ESG and sustainability. He has worked across Fortune 500 companies, startups, as well as public sector projects. His experience spans renewable energy, climate change, and corporate responsibility initiatives. He helps organizations turn ambitious sustainability goals into measurable impact. Amit brings a practical perspective on how businesses can balance growth with long term environmental and social value. I hope you find this conversation interesting. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, Eric Ciampoli of Manufacturing Roundtable. Today, we are joined by Amit Jain of Merck ESG. He's a sustainability executive with experience across Fortune 500s, different startups, and other public sector projects. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Eric.
So I like to start off our podcast by, figuring out what brought you here, and where did you come from, and how did you get here?
Sure. I'll sort of save it to just the ESG slash sustainability piece. Over the last 15 years or so, I've been working in various companies, as you mentioned, manufacturers with multinational corporations to various different manufacturing industries, consumer packaged goods to other types. And essentially, how I ended up here is, I started in ESG, teaching and working with the Los Angeles Community College District, the city of Los Angeles, in developing programs, a green business certification program, which is the largest in the US. Helped them set that program up. That led me to UCLA, teaching in their program, in their sustainability certification program. That got me in the corporate side, and that's where I've been ever since, doing either working on the corporate side or consulting on the corporate side.
So what drew you into this market in the first place? An issue for something you've experienced? You saw something, or you felt like you wanted to make a change? What drove you into it?
You know what? So let me go back and tell you from the beginning then. So in college, I had a e-commerce business, a startup, and through that process, we were raising money. I decided to go get my MBA. While I was getting my MBA and we were raising money, I was helping other businesses or startups raise money as well. And through that process of like raising money and going through venture capitals, angels, all that type, I realized it was kind of icky because the way that they view businesses is like commodities, right? So like if they have a portfolio of 20 startups, they're looking for one or two to go 20, 200x, right? Whatever they're doing in revenue. So they're not really treating the entrepreneurs, the startups, as like these sort of seedlings that you know they're nurturing. They're sort of looking for the ones that have the biggest potential and going there. And so then I started pivoting towards social entrepreneurs, and then I got into clean tech. And so with that, I sort of had to go back get another education. So I put together what I cobbled together my own master's degree in sustainability because that didn't exist back in the early aughts or late aughts. And so that sort of got me into the corporate side. And then, because there's all sort of, for me, it was all sort of coming around climate change. Like that was sort of the big sort of existential crisis that I was coming across. And that's how I sort of ended up into this practice.
Cool. So, as far as you see in the market today, how is ESD shaping decisions, particularly in the manufacturing industry, which is usually heavy waste, heavy energy consumption?
Yeah. So let's look at like mid-market companies. So companies under $1 billion, right? They're manufacturing primarily here in the US. They're probably privately held companies. We'll focus there. They're most likely selling to multinational corporations like an Amazon, or just think of any of the large sort of global public, global brands that we know of. These large companies now have what we call scope 3 emissions requirements, which means like downstream from them that they're setting for their suppliers to be able to, be a supplier to them. They have to have targets. So if you're a mid-market company, most likely if you've been in this space for, generations, you probably don't have sustainability baked into your culture. So it's not common. So when you see a questionnaire come from an Amazon or a John Deere or a large, company.
And L'Oreal.
Exactly. You kind of are sort of taken back, shocked, and realize, okay, there's a lot here that I need to do that we haven't even done. So first steps is we haven't even been collecting data on this, right? I mean, from a manufacturing standpoint, let me ask you, Eric, how many of the companies that you work with are monitoring their energy use and their utilities on a monthly basis?
If you asked me this 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said absolute zero. But those big corporations have made some headway with the supply chain, and a lot of it lives here in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey. So now I'd say almost 10 to 15% are watching their energy bill, and they're also watching things like the pounds of discharge, like cardboard, general waste, and they're measuring it. I mean, there's still a little bit room to grow on creation of that waste, but at least they're measuring what they're creating. Because I remember years back, we'd get one of those questionnaires, and it's like, okay, how many pounds of trash did we produce last year? No idea. So we just got to start guesstimating based on what we can find today.
Yeah, and that's like the critical point, right? Because it's not only are they making it a requirement, but they're also asking these manufacturers to set targets for themselves. And how can you set a target if you haven't tracked anything, right? And like you don't even have an right, you don't have an understanding of your capabilities already.
Yeah. You don't even know how much you're already wasting because you're not measuring anything.
Exactly. And then also, like, to your point on waste, right? There's a revenue streams there. There's commodities there that can be taken back, whether it's, paperboard or certain types of plastics or scrap metal from a maintenance shop. Like, there's a lot of opportunities to create some revenue streams coming back from the waste.
Or reduce the money, like particularly in food. I was having this conversation just earlier this week with a food manufacturer in northern New Jersey, and their sewage bills are going up and up because there's more and more solids that are getting into the drains. So one of the things we proposed was is capturing some of this solid that comes blasting out of the machine because of the water required to lubricate the plates. And why don't we catch it, screen out all the water, and save it and use it. It's perfectly fine as long as it doesn't hit the floor. It's edible still.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's another one is water is a big one that almost no one tracks that because it's such a low cost commodity. But in certain regions, particularly here in the on the West Coast, there's a lot of compliance that goes with that, and they're getting stricter and stricter in the amount of volume of water that you discharge or you consume.
Oh yeah, I did one of those projects 3 or 4 years back. It was a ice cream company, and in order to keep the continuous freezer from icing over, you got to run water through it. And I was like, wait a minute, like what's going on? Why are you dumping this the drain? He's like, well, the chiller's too big to put in here, and it's too heavy for the roof. I'm like, that's nonsense. Let's work on it. ROI was literally 2 months because they use a lot of water. It was almost $95,000 a year in their water bill. I was like, forget the cost. Think about all the potable drinking water that's going directly to the drain. I mean, even if we could just put a water filter on it, maybe it could have made a business opportunity. Filter that and then bottle it, reuse it every day, all day, just wasting, dumping money down the drain. But that's easy for a customer to get behind because there's an immediate cost savings, and it's like real balance sheet change. So, can you give an example of where sustainability created some real measurable savings or business valuation?
Yeah, I mean, so I think well let me start with the qualitative side and then I'll get to the quantitative side. So on the qualitative side, when I sort of look at ESG or sustainability as sort of the connective tissue in an organization. So it can because it's all encompassing when you get these ESG report or ESG questionnaires that you have to submit because they're asking not only about your environmental data, but they're asking about your welfare on your employees. They're asking for cybersecurity. That's another big thing that's come up in the last year. So they're asking a lot of questions about all the different types of things that are going on in your company. And typically, like ESG is viewed, as sort of this hindrance or extra sort of thing that we have to do. And my approach has always been is look, I'm coming in and I'm trying to help you do your job better. Whether it's a standard operator or a maintenance group or an HR team or whoever it is, right? The idea is like, how can we collaborate together to find some sort of innovative solution to these requirements or these new questions that are being asked of us from our customers. Um, so I think that there's a lot of, and then when you team that up with lean, now you have the continuous improvement mindset is also now focused on sustainability in it as well as so whether it's reducing inputs and looking at how do we reduce the outputs of waste and how do we find ways to be more efficient within our operation, logistics. So a lot of things come into place, right? On the quantifiable side, I can give you several examples. I'll start with maybe just renewable energy, right? So I think one of the myths about renewable energy is that it's cost prohibitive, but it can be. But there's a lot of economic drivers that can make it actually, very lucrative for an organization. And it can tell a great sort of narrative story about switching over to renewable, reducing your carbon footprint. Because you can use, in a lot of places, third-party financing, right? Where you're not investing any capital up front to get new solar on the roof, fuel cell battery systems and battery storage. So I worked with a bakery here in Southern California where we put in some natural gas energy battery systems, um, to basically cut down on demand during peak times, especially in the summer, because they were paying maybe I can't remember. It's pretty expensive per kilowatt, right? In the summertime, especially with demand during peak hours. So they were able to reduce, I think, shed about 10% of their overall load, with cost savings, no capital, shared savings model. So basically, what you're doing is you're working in third party financing. You're set up in an operating lease. They're financing the system. You're paying back with the savings that you save every month, and then at a little bit higher rate than what would normally go. But you're essentially saving money every month without having to invest any capital, right? And you're seeing this with a lot of solar, and even with the solar now, what they're doing is because a lot of the roofs have to be redone, right? Because they'll probably aren't under a 30-year warranty, so they'll bake that repair cost or renovation cost into the cost of the new solar panels going up as well.
Yeah, we just did a roof, 32,000 square foot roof tear off in northern Jersey for, well, it was also leaking. It was time, but we put the R30 insulation on to meet modern code, which will drop the heat gain and the heat loss in the winter. And we're going to be putting a substantial amount of solar on there because this place needs it. It's got freezers and refrigeration that run 24 hours a day. So it's well worth the investment, and it's going to pay back pretty quickly. Not even worrying about the SREX.
Right. Yeah, and then and so stuff like that is like, those are home run type swings that you're getting because you're doing a lot of things. You're doing cost savings. You're sort of upgrading your system. You're reducing your carbon footprint. You have all these sort of elements. It's sort of then it's like, what are the other things that we can do inside? Right, we're on the roof now. Let's go inside and see what are the other low hanging fruit things that we can find.
It's the fun stuff. So how do you balance that compliance with innovation, with the sustainability, and coming up with these new ideas and finding those things to fix?
Yeah, it's really like, doing sort of a root cause diagnostics and asking the question why a lot when we're in the manufacturing setting, working with the operators, working with the leadership within the operation itself, and just trying to find out, where are the opportunities or why have things been done a certain way? Is it because it's just has always been done that way, or have they looked at other new opportunities, right? When it comes to compliance, right? Because there's a lot of compliance, especially in the manufacturing setting. It could be, PFAS, it could be REACH. There's a lot of sort of other compliance things outside of the typical things that you get from your local municipalities and whatnot, that go downstream for the end user. So we have to obviously start there as the foundation. Is like, where are we in terms of compliance, and then it's like, if we're sort of putting together an ESG program, do we need to consider any certain type of ISO certifications? ISO 19001, ISO 14001. These are related to environmental, right? Um, Looking at those ISOs, is there a foundational sort of footprint that we could use baked in ISO to use it for the plant itself or the manufacturing operation itself? Um, and then we sort of go from there and see it's a constant leveling up, right? From like, what are we doing to compliance? What gets us to the next step? What's next and what's next? And continuously we're seeing, more and more requirement from these multinational corporations, the customers here that have those requirements that they're putting onto their supply chain.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen some opportunities with safety compliance also be able to become a leverage point for energy savings, particularly with things and industries that have heavy requirements for air control, like in bakeries and furniture production. And sometimes they don't opt for that return air buffer to pull some of that air back into the facility because they're afraid that it's going to be dirty and they're worried about the control of it. But there's already designs for that, for filtered HEPA to return that air that's cleaner than the air that originally it was most of the time, and cut down your energy bill.
That's a great point, Eric, about safety as being a leverage point because you can use that in warehouse settings, right? If you have old CFL lighting that sometimes fails or sometimes isn't meeting the codes in terms of the lumens on the floor, switching over to LED and a smart system that can, you know, that's operated off a sensor so that it lights up even more. You can use that and say, look, we now are beyond our safety requirements in terms of lighting in these warehouse spaces.
Yep. And it'll run for years versus having to change that bulb every God knows how many months, depending on what happens to it. Or sometimes they don't last very long, and then you're out there again on the lift changing it again.
Yeah, and that's a whole 'nother safety issue because you gotta have to scissor lift, you have to have a bonded, insured, operator going in there to do it if it's not an internal person. So you're reducing that risk that way too as well.
Yeah, I had projects a year ago. I was actually an LED lighting company, and they had lots of bulbs out on the warehouse. It was ironic. So, have you had any lessons learned that you can share with us from renewable energy projects and global CSR strategies?
Yeah. Let me think for a second. So I would say, you know, no matter what, the business case always makes sense. You can't tell somebody to do something just because it's the right thing to do. That never works. You have to have the business case no matter what. And developing those business cases are not always going to meet the ROI, right? That you meet. Because I'll tell you this with sustainability projects, especially capital sustainability projects in a manufacturing setting, let's say, the internal ROI that the company expects from their finance team is like, let's say 11%. Let's say the sustainability projects typically run between like 5 to 7 or 5 to 9% in that range. So you got to have a path forward for these projects that goes beyond the typical 11%, right? So you have to create a glide path.
Do you think that some of the initiatives that are being canceled are going to have substantial adverse effects on these initiatives?
You mean through policy and legislation from the current administration?
Yeah, you think that's going to see an immediate shift, or does that business case exist without these credits and special initiatives?
So I was at a conference in New York in June, and there was some people that worked in the government and some people that were exited out of the government, and they talked about this. Now, these aren't my facts; these are coming from a third party, but they said about 80% of solar projects that were currently in the pipeline may get canceled because there's no financing based on the rebates and incentives and tax incentives and all that stuff that was available. Um, which ironically, like 70% of those projects were in like conservative districts. But um, I did hear through a lot of the investors and institutional folks that they're scrambling to find other ways to finance projects. So it may be a little blip in the short term, but I think in the long term, it's going to be, it's going to come back. And I'll tell you, like with a lot of renewable energy projects, some of them are less expensive than, what you would think, like in terms of like a traditional sort of conventional project would be, just because of the payback and just because the cost of solar has gone down so much in the last 15 years that makes it a lot more affordable. I've seen large scope LED projects that I did where we're talking about like over $1 million over like a massive studio project where we bypassed the rebate and incentive with the local utility because we knew that it would take 6 months. The local utility was just had so much bureaucracy in it that we could still do the financing without getting their rebate, and it would still be cheaper. It was still coming out to be cost effective and meeting the criteria for financing.
So that's good news, because I have some clients that make some of those components that support that industry, and they've seen a big pause on orders for those particular components.
It doesn't surprise me, but the thing is, and I guess this is a good point to make here, is that whatever current administration is there, we have to look beyond those people and whether it's whoever it is, because realistically, we have to look at like end consumers. And what do consumers want? Well, consumers want progress. They want to buy from brands, and that's why there is a big push from Amazon and Walmart because they're so consumer facing that they have to have very ambitious targets that they've set for themselves, and so that because they understand that that's what the investors want and that's what the consumers want. Those are the largest drivers for them. So if they have to continue with it, and I think we're just going to see progress. There may be a blip and it may slow down, but I guarantee you it's going to continue.
Like you said, if the business case makes sense, if it saves money and it provides some type of value to the business financially as well as goodwill, I think they'll succeed. They'll go through because it makes business sense to invest in these things. And then some things are safety related and they need to happen anyways. So you tack on the feel good of, hey, while we're doing this, we're also doing this, and this is good for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's also the competitive space too, because you don't want to look at your competitors and see that they're doing all these, let's say large scale renewable energy projects. Like I can tell you from an example, I was consulting with a paper manufacturer in the Midwest, and they're a privately held company, but their competitors are all publicly traded, and their CEO was sending me notes like about these large renewable projects that their competitors were doing. It's like we need to get in this game too. We have land, we have a large, paper mill that's consuming, you know, megawatts and megawatts of energy, and we got to find a way to reduce that carbon footprint one way or another, right?
Yeah, and I'd imagine too they're also sucking up a lot of water from the local supply.
Yeah, about 900 million gallons annually. I think that's what their number was, and that was another thing for them, is because they were getting strict permits, and the permitting was coming down in terms of, so if they want to grow, and that's another thing to look at is the intensity that you're using: water, electricity, natural gas, and carbon. So per pound or per 1,000 pounds or per whatever that metric is for the company, because in this case, that water consumption, if you're going to increase your business, you have to increase your water consumption, right? Which means you're going to go push up against that permit limit. So you need to find a way to be more efficient with the way that you make paper now so that you can produce at an intensity number that's more palatable.
And even start recycling that water. That's the conversation right now in many food sectors is things that they use to process. There's a big resistance between the regulatories of FDA and USDA in recycling water. They're like, well, you're going to recycle it. How do you know it's safe? I'm like, well, in many cases, these systems make cleaner water than it what originally was coming out of the municipal supply as far as total. We're in the Northeast. We have a lot of remnants of lead pipes and other things that aren't going away for a while. And these waste recovery systems not only pull out bioorganics, they produce almost nearly pure water back into the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked with some bakeries in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, and that was an issue, right? Like, I mean, because you can't dump that water back. There's so many solids in there that it has to be treated before it goes back. And I'm sure you've been around those wastewater systems. They smell wonderful, don't they?
Fish and meat. Fish and meat makes a lot of, I would say, unpleasant water.
Yeah, and it's hard to get that smell off you too when you're out around those wastewater systems.
Yeah, I can. There's some places I've been where I have a special set of clothes that only goes there, and it goes in a bag in the garage until I go back. Yeah, the worst I've ever been though is in a graphite plant. You walk in there and walk out, you have graphite embedded in your pores that you never knew was even there. You take a shower and like all this black soot washes off you, and you're like, how'd that get there? You couldn't even see it. Yeah, that was fun though. That was a fun project. A lot of car cleaning. So, what types of manufacturers do you see that often overlook these sustainability efforts?
Um, like I said, it really is like it's going to be the privately held, smaller organizations that are family run, generations, have been doing this thing. They maybe think that sustainability is one thing, right, to them internally, which means we do right by our employees. For instance, like the paper manufacturer that I was working with, their biggest takeaway is like, well, we work with recycled paper. We make recycled paper. It's like, well, yeah, but everybody makes recycled paper. You're not the only one, right? So that can't be your claim to fame now. Like that would have it worked maybe 2 generations ago, but that's not the calling card anymore. So you need to redesign that. But it goes across all industries, right? It can be medical devices, it can be paper, it can be pharmaceuticals, and it's because they don't have a consumer facing brand. You're hidden, from the impacts of what happens to the end user or who you're selling your products to, and then that sort of boomerangs back to you in a period of time where it's like now you're being asked to participate in this. You're getting questionnaires. You're being asked about not only are you committed to like reducing your carbon footprint? Are you interested in signing up for science-based targets? Which is a whole nother initiative. I'm seeing that in pharmaceuticals, that the push from the large, um, life science companies is to get all their supply chain to participate in science-based targets. So what that means is you have to, quantify science, what your actual impact is to climate change, um, and quantify that and find a target. And sometimes the cost of that is it doesn't make sense. So you got to find other ways and other elements to find a way to make it palatable if you can't do science-based targets. But that's another big push that I'm seeing.
Well, that sounds a little complicated. It's a little difficult to measure that up. You got to start calculating the products you buy, the consumption of the supplier you bought it from that you very little oversight or awareness of, and what their supply chain looks like. How do you see the role of leadership in driving and designing the sustainability culture itself?
Yeah, I mean it comes from the top, right? So organizations that I've worked with or consulted with, it's really comes from the top management saying, "Look, this is important," and saying like this is a priority, and also saying, "Look, we're not going to. We have our business model, we have our strategy, but sustainability sort of lives over here. We got to put that into this strategy. It's got to be baked in, right? Because that's like I was saying, it impacts all the other different functions within an organization. So it's got to be baked into that corporate strategy, and so that takes leadership. And then the other thing is you got to link the sustainability performance to your operators, to your leadership in manufacturing. So, typically in your performance review, it's based on cost savings, it's based on projects you implemented, it's based on, efficiency numbers. Now let's add some sustainability numbers. Like I said, those intensity numbers for a plant manager or general manager. They should have sustainability linked goals in their job performance, and that way that sort of carries down to the operators, right? So everybody sort of bought into this. And you have to have, and the way that you sort of build that culture is with those wins, like I talked about. So if you can find some quick wins and start building on it, and look at it from a continuous improvement standpoint, now everybody's bought in. People are looking out for different projects. You're getting ideas from people that you didn't expect to have ideas about efficiencies, types of things, whether it's waste diversion or energy efficiency, things like that.
I'm thinking right as soon as you made that last comment, it's like, okay, we need to put sustainability metrics in for our plant managers and our supervisors and that. And I'm like, I love the idea. And then I put myself in their shoes for 1 second and I'm like, oh, great. Another thing I'm responsible for. And in many cases, like since this is still a new conversation, is you got to educate them. Do you have any packages or any programs that you can help make this middle management aware of what this is, what it means, and how to measure it? Because I can imagine even when I start coming in with lean KPIs, it's like, how do we do this? It's just like, how much could you make today? How much should you make today? And how long is it going to take you to hit that target? Are you going to meet your goals for the day? I can imagine a similar KPI from your perspective is, okay, how much energy did we consume today? Did we turn off the furnace at lunchtime? Things like that. Did someone leave the water running? Yeah, I've seen that many times, and I shut it off. Even in the men's room, people will just leave the faucet running, or a broken toilet. Like just little things that can be remedied, and basic stuff. Just consumption of paper towels. You don't need 78 extractions to dry your hands. You don't need that. One is enough.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that the training there's some like base level training that you can do, and I've provided. And then there's also, I think, some custom training that goes into that particular operation because every operation sort of is different, right? In terms of what is important and what the factors that go into it.
It's different, but there's a lot of commonality. If I can think of the way people do things and just how people think, it's not as different as you might expect. Everyone in food has similar traits, similar habits, things they try to focus on. Then you've got more industrial things in the middle world where they're trying to save scraps. And you've got different segments have different features or different focus areas.
Right. Yes. And I think, to your point, like that training, like there's a base level understanding of is like what is sustainability, right? And what does it mean for us within our operation? So that's and what you're saying, like that sort of goes across the board. But then it's like within our systems, within our manufacturing software, are there capabilities to capture some of this data that we're looking at, for these sustainability metrics? So then we got to sort of build that out, right? And it's always that because like we talked about earlier, like a lot of these places they're not collecting this data. So the first biggest hurdle is how do we get the data? How do we get it into a format that we can actually analyze it, come up with some trends, and start figuring out where we can, find some areas for improvement.
Hmm. So overall, is in the lean focus, how do you think and how do you believe that lean thinking connects the ESG and sustainability together?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of different lean teams in the past, and we've partnered on some great projects on whether it's like minimizing, inner packaging for like a Walgreens as a big customer, to rethinking packaging lines to reduce, energy, increase safety, increase efficiency. I think if you work in sustainability and ESG and you're not partnering with the lean teams on a regular basis, then you're doing yourself, you're mishandling because you absolutely need to partner with them because we're all looking for continuous improvement. We're all looking for cost savings. We're all looking for ways to reduce waste or reduce, not just like real waste, but like, whether it's waste of time or waste of any resource, right? So you got to partner with those folks with um, the lean team to see where those opportunities are. And the beautiful thing is like some lean teams can give you a project list, right? Here's some behavior based things that we've been working on. How can you help us with these? Whether it's sequencing equipment to lower demand, right? Things like that for like a manufacturing center. Like how let's find things of behavior based things that we can do together. Then we can look at the expense things, and then let's look down the road and create a schedule of capital investments over the next 5 years, to upgrade the equipment for efficiency, to increase the output, and also reduce our cost in terms of energy consumed and all that.
Hmm. Fantastic. Next question is, so as far as continuous improvement, what do you see as the intersection of efficiency and environmental responsibility? And what does it mean to you?
Yeah, the intersection I think that the intersection is always going to be like the business case, right? So like what are we doing that's helping the company? Is this increasing revenue? Is it reducing cost? Or here's another big thing, is it reducing risk? And not just risk from an operational standpoint, but risk from a reputation standpoint, right? And so we got to find that sweet spot where all those things sort of come together, and we can say, look, this project is a winner, right? Because like I said earlier, sometimes these sustainability projects don't always meet those financial metrics that companies set internally for what the payback should be. So we got to find other elements, and those are like those qualitative things where this is going to reduce our risk. This is going to make our organization more resilient. This is actually going to build a better case for business continuity. If we have renewable energy system that has a battery storage capacity that keeps us running in areas where we have brownouts or blackouts, things of that nature, or where there's incremental weather, right? Things of that. So, or it's looking at how to, in this, I'll use this case study to just sort of highlight it in another way. One of the things that a company I was working for, we had two distribution centers, one in Indiana and one in Georgia. And this was 2018. There was a large storm that came across the Midwest. Basically, you can go look. It looked apocalyptic, right? Like basically, Lakeshore Drive in Chicago was iced over. People had just abandoned their cars on the road, and that cost the business about $10 million that week. of product that we couldn't ship and sell. So that got us thinking to be, well, if why are we choked up on these two distribution hubs? Let's find other more modular ways to do this where we don't need to have one large distribution center. Let's have multiple. We can share a facility with other suppliers, and we can sort of work it in nodes rather than having to ship it to one point. It now we have this network that makes it easier to sort of get goods and supplies across the country rather than choking it off at these distribution centers.
Yeah, I feel too like a lot of it is just a lack of awareness. Like, I'm going to do something because I have a lot of responsibilities in my plant. I need to get this problem solved and move on. I was having a conversation the other day about a boiler. I'm like, you replaced the boiler? How old's the old one? Oh, it's only about 4 years old. I'm like, ooh, that's a bad sign. It's oversized, isn't it? They're like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, I've got an extensive background in heating and heating water and heating systems. And I'm like, it's very likely your boiler was suffering from a death spiral because it was cycling off and on very, very frequently. And they're not designed for that. He's like, yeah. The heat exchanger cracked. I'm like, exactly. Like, so you just replaced it with the same thing? No, we got a bigger one. I said, that thing's not going to last 2 years. He's like, but what's the difference? I'm like, you need two smaller ones. They need to modulate because your same system's heating the water for your sanitation crew, which means it only runs 5 hours a day and it runs continuously, which is fine because it'll keep going, which is good for the boiler. But then during the winter, it's off and on, off and on, off and on, and it's too big. And it's too big because you have it sized for your cleaning crew, not for your heating of your building, which is predominantly refrigerated, ironically. And I'm like, I'm sorry to tell you, but like, can you cancel that order? Well, we just spent 60 grand on that boiler. I'm like, oh, can you sell it to somebody? Because that's the wrong application. Let me tell you why. And I gave him a little brief notes like, if you can cancel that boiler, he's like, but how is two smaller ones going to be more efficient? The newer ones will modulate. You don't want it to go 0 to 100. You want it to modulate up, maybe even if it's a 3 to 1 turn down. That's fine. That means I can get like 30, 60, 90%, and I can modulate. And if I have two of them, I can share the load. So they're not continuously cycling as one. And yeah, it might cost you a little bit more to put two in, but now it's going to last you 8, 10 years. No problem. And it's going to save you energy because only one of them that's half the BTUs is going to run when you need it until the demand goes up. Then the other number two comes on load, and here you go. I remember years back when we mapped out the shower demand at the Bellagio Hotel. And that's a serious shower demand at 2 a.m. when people get out of the casino. And you need modulation. And just like your initiatives, like this one makes sense. Hopefully they can put the brakes on that boiler before it gets built and shipped because it's not the right choice. But there wasn't an awareness. Like, this is not something the operations manager's focused on. He's like, I just need a new boiler. I'm like, you need the right boiler for your application. And, who did you consult? Oh, we just ordered one.
Yeah. Yeah. And and I'll see that too. And this is something that when I'm consulting and I step away is I always tell anybody when they're dealing with vendors, whether it's a boiler or whether it's lighting, I'm like, these air compressors, HVAC, like those companies are used to being put together like sustainability reports, right? So tell me what this new equipment, how more efficient it's going to be, and what the carbon savings are going to be. And if a vendor can't do that for you, that's a red flag that you shouldn't be working with that vendor because they should be used to be putting these sort of proposals together now. And I always ask them to get that data as well, so that we can see it. Because any sort of new equipment, we want to know if it's going to be more efficient. What are the carbon reduction savings going to look like, as well as like what are the cost savings?
Yeah, and you also have to look at your facility design. When you're expanding, you need to take these things into account. Like right now, we're evaluating puncturing or running a conveyor system through a freezer wall. There's pros and cons to this. The efficiency is going to go up, but we're going to get some latent heat gain and some cooling losses. So we need to make sure that as the system's running inside, that we're not at too high of a positive pressure, because now it's going to start to escape out of this little portal the entire shift because the conveyor is running through it. And we're going to do what we can to minimize the size of the hole, which just changes the pressure drop. But if we can minimize this, we're going to get a lot less losses, as well as, insulating around the conveyor and using some flaps, some insulated foil flaps. We'll be able to recover some of that. But then again, like this is the pro versus the con of them leaving the door to the freezer open most of the day because they got to go in and out, and that's the result. The improvement is to put the conveyance.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and because you're doing that, the idea too is like the condensation is going to be much less with the conveyor than people going in and out.
Yes, yes, and we'll still get some ice stamps here and there, but it's not going to be a 20-foot wide door open for 27 minutes. There's an alarm on it, but I think someone removed the bell from it.
Yeah, it's got sick of listening to it.
Yeah, because the door's got to stay open. I mean, you got to go in and out, and you can't always do what you should do. You're on a fork truck. I'm not getting off and stopping and walking back, so they just leave it open. So, like you said, maybe that would be an exact good thing for operational metrics. Is, hey, are they closing the door, and how do you know? Because that's an energy savings. And refrigeration systems, they burn a lot of dollars.
They do, and especially like those big freezers, the condensation builds up, and it can become a serious, serious safety issue. I remember there was like a huge ice conglomerate that sort of was hanging off an air handler, and it was like if that falls on somebody, that's a. I mean, we got to get that fixed.
Next time you see that kind of stuff, you give me a call. There's probably a defrost malfunction with that system because they're not supposed to ice up that much. That's a problem. Those systems are designed to run continuously until it's time to defrost. And if it's not defrosting properly, something's wrong with the way the system is designed, or there's way too much atmospheric moisture building up in the space that's causing the ice to exceed expectations.
Yeah. I think what we found in that particular one was that the insulation was terrible because it was up against the wall of the outside of the building, and we're talking this was in South Carolina.
Ooh, yeah, you got to give it a
It wasn't a
buffer air
freezer.
gap.
Exactly. It wasn't a freezer in the facility, it was against the wall, part of the core and shell of the building, and that was
Yep.
the issue.
Yeah, you can't do that. You got to leave a buffer. That air gap is a big bonus, and because if you have that, temperature differential, you can end up with mold too. And mold, as we all know, in a food facility or refrigerated environment, that's bad news for everybody, both the customers and the manufacturer. So, in closing, what advice would you have for manufacturing leaders who are looking to start their ESG journey?
Yeah, I would say, first you gotta sort of look at your competitive space and see where you're at, right? It doesn't have to be your direct competitors, but it can be, you know, people within your industry, within the sort of circular industry. So if it's, medical devices or, looking beyond just that and seeing what's going on in the business environment. I would say from a risk standpoint, I think you need to do, you know, sort of an assessment there and understand like what are the risks that we're carrying right now without doing anything. And really have to understand that. And then, you work with myself or third party consultants that can help you identify those risks. And then understand what's material to your operation. Going 100%, net zero or 100% renewable energy, that, that may not make sense. Maybe it's something in between, right? But we got to understand, again, building that business case. Because I guarantee you there's a business case there. They just haven't quantified it yet. And I think, you just need help understanding that.
Fantastic. And I agree with your approach too. And once you get that business case, though, you can get a lot of leverage with your CFO saying, "Listen, this makes sense and dollars. Here's how we start." So thank you so much for joining us today. It's so great to have you on our podcast, and also too to welcome you to the ECIC network and team to work with our customers to help them find solutions in their energy savings initiatives and leaders looking to start their ESG journey. Thank you, all you listeners out there. We're really glad that you joined us for this episode. And if you're looking to learn more on ESG and starting your journey in cost savings as well as energy efficiency and going green, give us a shout out. You can reach us below or Amit directly at the link below in the video. Thank you for joining us, and you can please subscribe to our podcast on Spotify and YouTube.